told by the fishermen and their fathers and grandfathers that when the fog returns to Antonio Bay, the men at the bottom of the sea, out in the water by Spivey Point, will rise up and search for the campfire that led them to their dark and icy death.
Shh, it's the Film Flamers.
Hey guys, I'm Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert.
And we're the Film Flamers.
And we are here to bring you some perfect November episodes.
Yes, that's always the goal for any month, really.
That's right. But especially November.
We definitely like to give you perfect November episodes any month of the year.
And we all kind of need it, I think. So hopefully these episodes will bring you a little joy amongst their really heavy themes.
Right. We hope to bring you some clarity in these trying times. And with the clarity brings The Fog.
That's right. The Fog is a 1980 American independent supernatural horror film directed by John Carpenter, who also co-wrote the screenplay and created the music for the film. It stars Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Atkins, Janet Leigh, and Hal Holbrook. It tells the story of a strange, glowing fog that sweeps over a small coastal town in Northern California.
This cast is amazing. I feel like I'm one icon away from just going into horror seizures.
I know. It is a royalty at its very definition.
The film was shot by cinematographer Dean Cundy, and Carpenter stated the appearance of the film was inspired by Val Lewton-produced horror films like I Walked with a Zombie from 1943 and Isle of the Dead from 1945, which he described as, quote, very shadowy, all suggestion, and he has all sorts of melodrama going. I was a real fan of that sort of thing. After viewing a rough cut of the film, Carpenter was dissatisfied with the results. Recalling the experience, Carpenter commented, "It was terrible. I had a movie that didn't work, and I knew it in my heart."
But it was rectified. Okay, listeners. You're the only person I know who can make yes ma'am sound like screw you. This is The Fog.
John Carpenter's The Fog.
This is KAB, Antonio Bay. Stevie Wayne here, and let me be the first to wish Antonio Bay a happy birthday. We're 100 years old today, and keep a watch out for that fog bank heading in from the east.
100 years ago, between midnight and 1, something unknown came out of the fog. Now it has returned.
Oh, Jesus.
100 years ago, between midnight and 1, something unnatural came out of the fog. Now it has returned. Years ago, between midnight and 1, something evil came out of the fog. Now it has returned.
Who's there?
The fog.
Antonio Bay has a curse on it. We're all cursed. There's no water getting here, but something awful cold did.
I think I'll go to Vancouver now.
Where's the fog now?
Well, it should be right outside my door now.
Oh, there's something different about this fog. Dan, stay away from the door! Someone listen to me!
Get inside and lock your doors. Close your windows. There's something in the fog. Stay away from the fog. creator of Halloween, the ultimate experience in terror and suspense. John Carpenter's The Fog, starring Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, John Houseman, Janet Leigh as Kathy Williams, and Hal Holbrook as Father Malone. The Fog. What you can't see won't hurt you. It will kill you. Between midnight and 1, it will find you.
All of ye townsfolk of Antonio Bay, a small coastal town in Northern California, have entrusted their young children to sit on the beach with an old man in the middle of the night to hear ghost stories. He tells the last one at exactly 11:55 p.m., way past their bedtimes. The story is a doozy, though, and about their little hamlet. You see, 100 years ago on that very night, a clipper ship, the Elizabeth Dane, mistakenly thought a beach campfire was a lighthouse and crashed into the rocky shore in an unearthly fog, killing the entire crew. The old man completes his story at the stroke of midnight, and all manner of paranormal hell breaks loose throughout the town, including the return of the glowing, unearthly fog. Father Malone, played by Hal Holbrook, is drinking in his study at the church when a stone flies out of the wall, revealing the journal of his grandfather, also Father Malone. He settles in to read. Town resident Nick, played by Tom Atkins, picks up a hitchhiker, Elizabeth, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, and all of the windows in his truck mysteriously shatter. They head home to Bone, but a strange figure appears in the fog and knocks on the door, cock-blocking Nick for the rest of the night. The fog envelops the fisherman's trawler, while its crew lounge around drinking. The three men investigate the strange occurrence, and they're all killed by angry, piratey ghosts. During all of this, Stevie, played by Adrienne Barbeau, local DJ and radio station owner, is playing some jazzy tunes for the town's enjoyment. She ends her broadcast for the night at 1 a.m. when the paranormal events end. The following morning, still unsupervised, Stevie's son, Andy, finds a gold doubloon on the coastal rocks, which turns into a piece of driftwood and the word Dane etched in it. He takes it home to his mom, who brings it with her to the radio station. While she admires the water from the lighthouse radio station, the driftwood starts to leak water all over everywhere. The etched lettering changes to say, 6 must die, before somehow catching fire, despite its moistness. She begins her broadcast telling everyone to enjoy the town's centennial celebrations. Speaking of celebrations, Kathy Williams, played by Janet Leigh, is in charge of those. She's worried about her husband because he didn't come home from his fishing trawler the night before. But he drinks a lot, and she's got shit to do, so goes about her day. She and her assistant Sandy, played by Nancy Loomis, visit the old church to make sure Father Malone is sober enough to say a prayer at the celebration. He's not. He's been drinking and reading all night. He tells them about the contents of his grandfather's journal. You see, 100 years ago on that very day, his grandfather and 5 co-conspirators set that beach campfire deliberately, wrecking the Elizabeth Dane. The ship was captained by Blake, a wealthy leper, who wanted to establish a leper colony nearby. These 6 non-leprous men couldn't have that, so naturally they wrecked the ship, which killed the lepers, and they stole the lepers' gold. They used the money to found Antonio Bay and build the church. Father Malone is very upset about this, but Kathy tells him to pull himself together and goes off to keep the festivities in motion. Meanwhile, Nick and Elizabeth find the fishing trawler adrift in the sea and climb aboard to investigate. The fishermen are gone, and everything is wet and rusty. It's as though it's been capsized. As they wait for the Coast Guard, a body of one of the men falls out of the locker onto Elizabeth. They take the man for an autopsy, and the ME is perplexed because, even though the man's eyes have been gouged out, he appears to have drowned. While Elizabeth foolishly stands with her back turned to the corpse, it gets up off the slab and grabs a scalpel. He carves the number 3 in the floor tile and is now finally, and for sure, totally dead. Antonio Bay starts its birthday celebrations as the glowing, unearthly fog begins to roll in from the sea. The local weatherman calls Stevie at the radio station as the fog surrounds his weather building. He assumes some hooligans are shining lights in the fog, and he goes outside to confront them, trying to be a big, impressive man for Stevie, but instead is killed by a leper ghost. That's 4 dead. Stevie, using her lighthouse vantage point and detailed knowledge of every street in town, watches the fog roll in, straight for her house, and her finely supervised kid. She interrupts the smooth jazz and pleads for her listeners to save her son. Nick and Elizabeth are up for the challenge. They save the kid, but his babysitter has been leper killed. That's 5 dead. 1 more to go. The fog is enveloping the town, and Stevie encourages everyone to get inside, or better yet, head to the old church, where Nick, Elizabeth, Kathy, and Sandy do. The fog reaches the lighthouse/radio station, and the ghosts lay siege to it, forcing Kathy to hide and for some reason climb to the roof, where she is cornered by the leper ghosts. At the church, Father Malone drunkenly reads more of the journal to try and find a way to save the day. As the fog finally reaches the church and the leper ghosts make their way inside, Father Malone has an idea. He grabs a large gold cross that was next to the journal in the wall, because why should he have taken that out sooner, and takes it into the chapel to flaunt it to the leprous ghost pirates. He's all like, "Take your gold, and me." The ghost of Blake seizes the golden cross, and the leper ghost and cross vanish into a flash of light. The fog rolls away from Antonio Bay. The ghosts have also vanished from the lighthouse roof, and Stevie makes her way back to the microphone to warn the town that the fog might come back one day, so be ready. As everyone leaves the church, Father Malone remains. He wonders why he was spared when only 5 lives were taken in revenge, not 6. He barely has time to drink it over when Ghost Blake returns with his leper minions. He decapitates Father Malone, the 6th death, and settles the score. The end.
The Fog was scheduled to be released at Christmas that year by Avco Embassy Pictures, but its release date was delayed to February 1st, 1980. The film was given a staggered release in various cities before expanding to further locations later that month. The film would eventually gross more than $21.3 million against a budget of $1.1 million.
That's amazing.
It is. I mean, that's quite a return for an 80s horror movie.
Exactly, yeah. I don't know how big of a hit that was, although we will get to a conversion later.
Oh, really?
I'm going to do that.
Because I did the math when I was doing some notes. I was like, I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. The Fog has a 75% on Rotten Tomatoes and is certified fresh. The audience score sits at 65%. The site's consensus reads, "A well-crafted return to horror for genre giant John Carpenter, The Fog rolls in and wraps viewers in suitably slow-building chills."
Upon its initial release, The Fog received mixed responses from critics. Ernest Leogrand of the New York Daily News gave the film a middling 2 out of 4 star review, praising the performances but writing that Carpenter obviously is entranced by ghost stories, but he seems willing to sacrifice story for effect. Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times similarly lauded the acting and complimented the film as an elegant and scary thriller of the supernatural that's far more impressive and satisfying than Carpenter's grisly and pointless but profitable Halloween. Kevin, that review did not age well.
The New York Times' Vincent Canby praised the film's visual elements, but felt it ultimately paled in comparison to Carpenter's Halloween, describing it as, quote, "neither a rewarding ghost story nor science fiction, though it borrows freely from both genres. Unlike Halloween, which is a model of straightforward terror and carefully controlled suspense, The Fog is constructed of random diversions. There are too many storylines, which necessitate so much cross-cutting that no one sequence can ever build to a decent climax." In his 1980 review, Roger Ebert gave the film 2 out of 4 stars, commenting, quote, "The movie is made with style and energy, but it needs a better villain. This isn't a great movie, but it does show great promise from Carpenter."
Oh. There are some accolades and legacy at the Saturn Awards. It was nominated for Best Horror Film, but lost to The Howling, and Best Visual Effects, but it lost to The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, yeah. It'd be tough. In 2005, the film was remade under the direction of Rupert Wainwright, with a screenplay by Cooper Lane and starring Tom Welling and Maggie Grace. Though based on Carpenter and Hill's original screenplay, the remake was made more in the vein of a teen horror film and given a PG-13 rating. Greenlit by Revolution Studios with just 18 pages of script written, the film was panned for its poor script and acting and has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 4%.
And that's why we are not covering it on Patreon this month.
Never, not ever.
No. As hot as Tom Welling is, I just can't abide watching that movie again. 18 pages of script. Why? I hope somebody was fired.
Yeah, who even is Rupert Wainwright?
Exactly. Well, do you want to get into some of this movie? Let me open up a drink for this conversation, I feel.
Oh, yeah.
Fog my brain.
Yeah, you're going to have to toast this cast.
For reals.
So most of the characters in this movie were actually named after previous crew and partners that John Carpenter had worked with, or characters from horror history, including, as an example, the town's coroner, who was named Dr. Phibes, if you didn't notice, after the titular character of the horror film starring Vincent Price from the early 1970s.
I did not notice that, but that's neat.
I feel like people would have noticed that then, given only 10 years difference.
Right. I don't know how popular Dr. Phibes is today. You know what I mean? I know what that is. Like, obviously, I've seen the movies, but like, I also don't know that they ever said his name in the film. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. They did say Stevie Wayne in the film.
They did say Stevie Wayne.
Which, of course, is Adrienne Barbeau. And I think this is probably my favorite role of hers ever.
I really, really like Adrienne Barbeau. I mean, because I like Maude a lot, right? So the TV series with B. Arthur that predates the Golden Girls.
Oh, she was in that?
She was in that, right? But she wasn't really a movie actress.
Well, yeah, she was also in a horror show, right? Before this. And that's how, or like TV movie and other things. Mm-hmm. And that's how she and John Carpenter met, because he directed a TV movie.
Oh, Somebody's Watching Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that she was in that, right? And, you know, and I've seen her in Creepshow and, you know, other things. She was in like Grease, like the original Broadway production.
Right.
And, you know, she's been in TV and everything. But this is her first feature film.
And I mean, she was an accomplished actress by the time that she did this, but you're right. I mean, this is the first time that she was really on the big screen. And I mean, when I look at her career, the things that I think of mostly are like horror genre work, right?
Right. And of course, I knew her first without even knowing it from Batman the Animated Series, because she did the voice of Catwoman.
I didn't know that. My goodness. And I watched that show.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's great in this. I think that she's great in Creepshow, obviously, as that really drunken, like nagging wife. Mm-hmm. And she's good in things like Escape from New York and whatnot, you know? And like I know she was in John Carpenter related things and the people who worked in that circle.
Right, because she was married to him.
That's right.
So he wrote this role directly for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
But she was good. She's really good in this movie. I feel like a lot of characters are always talking about her voice and whatnot because she's the DJ and that's what people associate her with.
Well, I like her better. Like, she's too convincing a villain, and she annoys the shit out of me in Creepshow.
Oh, yeah.
And in this, she is mothering and also protective of her town, but also really, really showcases her voice.
Yep.
Because she can show what she's really, really great at, which is controlling her tone for both dramatic acting as well as like the sultry, like, you know, velvety, smooth tones of a jazz DJ. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And it's just like a perfect role for her. And of course it was written for her by her then husband. So yeah, it's, you know, a lot of that was going around back then. I guess nepotism wasn't as taken seriously back then as it was today.
If you listen to the commentary on Escape from New York, which is Kurt Russell and John Carpenter talking, and they're in the same room, they're drinking. You can literally hear the ice clinking in their like whiskey glasses.
That was the anecdote from watching the commentary for The Thing.
They do both for that too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, but in that one, Adrienne Barbeau's in that movie, and so is Kurt Russell's ex-wife. And so they're like, there's our ex-wives, blah, 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 blah. Like, their commentaries together on these DVDs are fucking delightful, and I love it.
Yeah.
So,
Adrienne Barbeau was also in The Thing, if you remember.
Oh, she was the voice of the computer.
Yeah, she was.
It's right. So, it's just like, guys, honestly, go find the DVDs and listen to these commentaries because it's really, really fun and interesting to hear both of those men talk. I know Kurt Russell's not in this one because John Carpenter does the best. And that's kind of a dead thing now. People don't really do that anymore. So you have to go check these out.
Well, we did get the new rescan of The Fog, and there is an intro to this that might have been on a previous Blu-ray.
That's possible. I had never seen it.
But yeah, and I thought it was just going to be an introduction, right? But it was like a good 10-minute sequence about kind of a short making of.
Yeah, and it was a full-on like interview with John Carpenter, right? Who's an interesting man. I'm sure that we'll talk about him more later on.
There's a documentary about John Carpenter on that 4K new scan.
Definitely need to see that.
So I definitely want to see that because it was like talking about The Thing or whatever, and the road to the thing or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So I really want to watch that. But yeah, anyway, this is a fascinating cast headed by Adrienne Barbeau in my favorite role for her. Although, and I don't want, you know, torch wielding villagers after me, I have not seen Escape from New York.
That's okay. There's time.
I have seen Escape from LA.
I'm sorry.
I like that movie.
No, I like it too. That's the thing about like, as we get into this more and start talking about John Carpenter, and I know we talked about him probably at length when we did Halloween, but there's been, a span of years since we did that episode. Like John Carpenter is an amazing horror director. He's one of my favorites, right? Because he makes mostly good movies. Even Escape from LA, which a lot of people didn't like, I thought was amazing fun.
That was fun.
Yeah. So, of course.
It was kind of Sam Raimi-ish,
Yeah, it was getting into that John Carpenter territory where he was just like, I'm going to make this movie whether, anyone watches it or not. And that's fine, because then we get things like vampires and whatnot. And just like some of those like 90s John Carpenter movies that people write off. Yeah, and so like, I think he just makes really interesting movies and they're all kind of different.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, of course, we have Jamie Lee Curtis as Elizabeth Sully. Now, she said that she got this part written into the film by John Carpenter for her, specifically, who felt sympathy for her after the success of Halloween had failed to lead her to obtaining other roles.
Thank God John Carpenter cast her in this movie, too, to like keep her fresh.
Although it makes me think, based on Adrienne Barbeau's role, because she's stuck in that lighthouse. She only has one scene in this whole movie with another human being, outside of the pirate ghosts or whatever. But it makes me wonder if she was actually the original romantic lead and not Jamie Lee Curtis.
It's possible, but I mean, maybe when he started to look at like what each actress was capable of and what they'd be best at in this movie, I think that he ultimately came to the right decision when casting, because Jamie Lee Curtis is really good in this role, which is small.
She is, but at the same time, I feel like it could have been filled by other actors. Like I can see other people besides Jamie Lee Curtis in this. She obviously is always competent.
Yes.
But I feel like any other 80s horror actress or genre actress at the time could have done it, including Adrienne Barbeau.
Well, I mean, like, you used the word nepotism already, and I feel like John Carpenter really practices nepotism when he casts his movies. Because if you look at his oeuvre, right, he's always working with these same actors and actresses throughout his career. Like Buck Flowers is in like every John Carpenter movie. He's in They Live. He's in The Fog as one of those trawler, fishermen.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like, John Carpenter really does the things of other directors that we admire, like Flanagan, right? He goes back to the actors that he likes to work with, that knows can do the job. And so, like, yeah, he could put anybody in these roles, but like Jamie Lee Curtis was better than serviceable. He had already worked with her, and even if he was doing her a favor.
Yeah. I don't think that it's bad of her to get cast in this at all. Mm-hmm. But there is some part of me that wants to see the version of this where it really is that Adrienne Barbeau's character who's kind of driving the whole film here.
And gives her more to do.
Yeah. Right. And there's that dynamic, almost that, Dante's Peak dynamic of the lead also being kind of the narrator of the story, but also having the kids in danger,
Because I was just about to say that. I was like, she really is kind of the narrator of this, and she is just like the person that she's the character in the movie that really keeps the viewer like focused on the action, right? And when that reviewer had said there's a lot of storylines, there's a lot going on in this, and we'll get into that too. But yeah, Adrienne Barbeau really does like connect with these characters, but never in person, really, and just really keeps the story going. And it's pretty fascinating. So Jamie Lee Curtis is always good, as well as Tom Atkins, right? Who's kind of like thankless in this particular role too, I think, but he's good.
And of course, his character is named Nicholas Castle, which of course is named after the actor who played Michael Myers in Halloween.
That's right. We've already talked about Tom Atkins in our Patreon episode where we covered Halloween 3.
Season of that bitch.
And one of my favorite, it's my favorite Halloween sequel. I'm not even going to say one of. Damn it.
Yeah. Tom Atkins always kind of weirds me out. To me, he kind of looks like Charles Cyphers.
You think
at first, and then, but then obviously not. I don't know. Like,
I mean, it is kind of. I mean, this particular movie, you're right, because it's hard to kind of differentiate.
These earlier movies were like zero diversity, so like there's like a sea of white guys, and
it's all like white people in the 80s, and they all kind of dress the same and look the same anyway.
Yeah,
right. So Tom Atkins, though, I mean, he's got a really good like storied horror career aside from The Fog and Season of the Bitch. He's in Night of the Creeps, right? And so he's in lots of really good, some of my favorite 80s horror. So I like him.
He just seems like he's like not an obvious, like leading man.
No, he's
look.
not.
Like he just looks like he kind of like slipped through the cracks. Like maybe he has a really extremely poor man's version of like Kurt Russell or something.
He's like Tom Atkins to me is like we always call what's his name like poor man's Tom Hardy, right? So I think that he's kind of poor man's Kurt Russell because they're always trying to shoehorn him into roles where he's supposed to be a leading man, like a love interest and a hero. And I'm like, he doesn't really have that look about him, He pulls it off, but like at first glance, he'd be like, well, this is a secondary character. And then the next thing you know, he's in like 90% of the fucking movie. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it ended up being the lead because you just don't expect it. But it also makes the movie a little more grounded because these people don't look like supermodels.
That's true.
Yeah. So also we've got Janet Leigh, who's of course Jamie Lee Curtis's mother.
That's right.
And of course the corpse in the shower from Psycho.
Yeah. One of the most famous scenes in all of like horrordom. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of my favorite things about The Fog. And I love The Fog is that Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis are both in this movie and they're not ever really together until the end of the movie. They don't really get to interact. There's a scene where they're both in the bar at the same time, but we don't even know that Jamie Lee Curtis is there. Janet Leigh leaves and the camera pans over and there's Jamie Lee Curtis drinking a beer. And I'm like, is she going to get to talk to her mom at all? I was just like, God.
Yeah. We also got Nancy Loomis from Halloween as Sandy Fadell. She's always great.
She is great. I love her in Halloween. I think she's probably one of my favorite characters in that movie. And I like this actress. She doesn't really change the way that she acts ever. She's always kind of like a mean girl bitch.
She's kind of like a Daria in this movie.
Yeah. No, she really is. She's very sarcastic and like, yeah. But
still kind of earnest and a good person, but it's just how she communicates. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, but she's fun and I like her. And she's a really good part of Halloween and she gets killed, obviously. But she's given a lot more to do in this movie than in Halloween. And I feel like John Carpenter was like, all right, let's go back and get this actress and like put her in something else.
Yeah.
And he really gave her a lot more like room to do things.
No, she's quoted to say that she was really, really lucky to get cast in The Fog because she felt like she was just like exploring different parts of herself as far as like not just Halloween, but like the more strong kind of boisterous version of herself for the first time. And also a director that she really obviously gets along with. Great. I got to work with her mother, got to work with other cast members. So it was for her, it very much was like coming home.
And that's amazing too. And I wonder how much all these people enjoyed being in this movie, right? I mean, there was no way to know
with the like reshoots and everything that had to happen,
Oh, it's true.
So I don't know how people produce that. I don't know how people like call up all the actors again and be like, okay, we got to do a month of research shoots or whatever. Maybe that's all contracted into them. So it's like you have some overflow for like ADR and other things. I don't know. But somehow they ended up doing it. But before we get too far into that, we also have Charles Cyphers as Dan O'Bannon or Dan the Weatherman. And of course, this is named after Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Dark Star and of course, Alien, and ended up being the director of Return of the Living Dead. Yay. So Dan O'Bannon.
I love Dan O'Bannon.
Yeah.
And this character is like goofy, you know what I mean? But, and he's really just there to showcase more of Adrienne Barbeau, really, in my opinion.
Yeah. Something for her to kind of ping off of, I think.
That's right. Because she needed that.
Yeah. And it's for someone that we don't feel too bad about dying, I guess.
I don't feel bad about a lot of these people who die in this movie, but we'll get to that.
Right. So, okay, let's talk about the background a little bit, right? So the initial inspiration for The Fog came to John Carpenter when he was still with his collaborator at the time and then girlfriend, Deborah Hill, who were promoting their film Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976 in England. So the two visited Stonehenge during that trip where they witnessed an eerie fog rolling over the landscape from a distance.
And he thought to himself, pirates.
Yes. So Carpenter stated that he drew additional inspiration from the story of the British film The Trollenberg Terror from 1958, which dealt with monsters hiding in the clouds. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I have not. Okay.
And also in the DVD commentary, John Carpenter noted that the story of the deliberate wreckage of a ship and its subsequent plundering was based on an actual event, which is actually the wrecking of the Frolic. Shitty name for the Frolic.
What a gay boat name.
All aboard the Frolic.
Coming.
That took place in the 19th century near Goleta, California. So this event was actually portrayed more directly in the 1975 Tom Laughlin film, The Master Gunfighter, if you're interested.
I have never heard of that either.
Right. And also there's like short stories and other things. Apparently this happened a lot or enough where it's been in short stories, literature, and in actual news on the East Coast, which is, of course, more known for, the lighthouse culture of the, of the 100 years prior, the 1870s or whatnot. And so they would light fires or they would try and get ships to wreck so that they could, pirate them without having a ship of their own.
That's smart.
So that happened. So this could very well be a true story. All except the ghosty, wispy, foggy part.
I've seen this movie so many times in my life. I mean, when we watched it the other night, it was probably like, it had to have been around like time 12, I think. Like, it's just something that I watched a lot when I was younger. And oftentimes when talking about movies that we have watched in our younger years, we get to the time where we do the episode and I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this since I was like 9 or whatever. But The Fog is not the case, right? I have watched The Fog consistently throughout my life. And I never knew like why or where this came from. It's not based on a novel. And so when we were watching that little intro, I was just like, okay, that's really interesting to know that he like took those things and created the screenplay for it.
Yeah. And I think that's fine. I like that he was inspired, but at the end of the day, he made The Fog, which, let's get into it a little bit more.
Okay.
Right. So filming took place from April to May in 1979 at Raleigh Studios in Hollywood, California for the interior scenes and on location at several other cities in California, including Bolinas, Inverness, and the Episcopal Church at the Ascension and Sierra Madre. And of course, Point Reyes. I have been to Point Reyes. Very interesting place, right? I still remember to this day how it smelled.
What did it smell like?
It smells like the sea, but more than other areas. There are so many natural like wetlands and coastal forested areas within there that are super unique for that area.
Yeah.
It has a very unique smell of like the decay that you could get in the summertime at New Orleans or something, but also mixed with like just sea shanty or something like.
I would love to experience that. I think it's beautiful. Right?
Yeah. And it's definitely, I was kind of pseudo camping down there when I was in like late elementary school, like 5th grade. So yeah, it's a cool area. And all those areas are easy to film in. Obviously it's Hollywood. Of course, that's more Northern California than Hollywood for sure.
Have I ever told you what my like dream bucket list vacation for America is?
No.
I want to like fly into Southern California and rent a car and like drive the coast and just like stop wherever I feel like it and whatnot, like all the way through the state. And I think that would be fucking amazing.
Yeah, there's something amazing about like just driving on Highway 1, right?
Yep. So
what you want to do is kind of go, early summer, late spring or something like that and rent a convertible.
Oh my God, that'd be so fun.
And that's what you want to do. So yes, I would like to do that too. And we can Thelma and Louise it through California on Highway 1.
That's right. We'll stop at Point Reyes and we're like, smell that decay.
Smell that Dickensian decay. So as we said at the top of the episode, after viewing a rough cut of the film, John Carpenter thought it was absolute shite. And so he had only 1 month to kind of fix it. So he subsequently added the prologue with Mr. Mcginnis, which was of course played by John Houseman, telling ghost stories to fascinated children by a campfire, which was filmed on a soundstage. And I feel like that really, really helped to set up. I can't imagine this movie without it.
Yep.
Like it really sets this up as the intention of the film, which is to be a ghost story, right? And that's as simple as that, right? And it's perfect for that.
Yeah, you just took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, because like without that intro, there's a really long portion of this movie before things really start to happen. We're like, I would assume that they had all those paranormal events happening in the town, but that little intro story from John Houseman is amazing. And I love how this movie starts with like his pocket watch, like sort of dangling, right?
And they were smart enough to put it in the soundtrack. So if you get the soundtrack, his prologue is in there with the first opening orchestral score.
That is also amazing. It's just like, it's a really, really good start to this movie, and it really sets it up as a traditional kind of ghost story.
Yeah. Of course, this does not have a orchestral score, but we'll get into that too. He also added other scenes and reshot others in order to make the film more comprehensible, more frightening, gorier. Among other additions were the sequence in which Jamie Lee Curtis's character is approached by the walking dead corpse in the morgue, as well as the finale in which Barbeau's character ascends to the roof of the lighthouse to escape the Mariner ghosts. Right. So that you mentioned, for inexplicably, she climbs up to, yeah. So that was all done basically in post to make it more exciting so that she could escape from something other than like try and travel around the window, ceaselessly escaping from the thing.
And I get it, like that does make that scene a little bit more exciting. But
I think the body on the boat, like leaning back on Jamie Lee Curtis for that jump scare, I think all of that stuff just wasn't in it before. And it was kind of like a Nancy Drew caper before.
Which would be very, very boring for audiences then and now. I think especially now.
Yeah, and I think Scanners had just come out, and so they were looking for things that were a little bit gorier.
Well, it's hard to compete with David Cronenberg, but and you maybe they added some more of those like violent scenes, because the ghosts have all these like stabby implements to kill people with.
Yes, so that entire scene on the boat where they're attacking the fishermen, that wasn't there before.
Okay. Well, he made right choices. The one thing about this movie that I don't like, apparently, out of these added scenes was that when the corpse get off the table, because none of the other victims ever come back to life. And I was just like, okay. And they barely show the three scrawled on the ground and don't really take the time to explain why. It's not until much later that I realized, okay, they're going after a very specific body count.
Yes, exactly. And my first watch, I did not see the lettering on the driftwood change to 6 must die. Yeah. And because I was looking at the water, I was like, oh, all the electronics,
when you're just like going after this, like, save that quick, grab that.
And I was not reading the sign again because I had already looked at, this has the day or whatever. And so I thought, that's not going to change, but it did. And so I realized that on this watch. Right. And so like the whole body count thing, like adds a little bit more to like why Adrienne Barbeau knows what's going on quicker. Yep. But there's some issues just from really, really hurriedly trying to like make this a more exciting movie. So overall, approximately a whole third of the finished film is the additional footage completed during reshoots.
Wow.
And the reshoots increased the film's budget from $900,000 to $1.1 million. Right. So originally this budget was actually $900,000, less than $1 million. So only a $200K difference. So in a month, they basically reshot a whole third of this movie and re-edited it for $200,000. So just as a quick reminder, $900K in 1980 is the equivalent of a $3.5 million budget today, or I guess you could say $4 million with the reshoots, which is not super big at all.
No, I would consider that to be a really small independent made film.
And what it won in 1980 was $21 million, or what it made. And today the equivalent would be $82 million.
Which is really impressive.
So 3.5 mil to 82 mil. It's a huge, huge, huge span.
That's right. So it means people were going to see this movie.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not sure what kind of marketing it had. I feel like The Fog has a very...
Theoretically, they spent another, I think they doubled it almost for the marketing.
And it worked, obviously, because people went to go see this. It has a really iconic poster of Jamie Lee Curtis, like, trying to close a door with a hand coming through it and fog, and like that was on the video cover for a very long time. It's been replaced by something less exciting now.
Michael Myers, The Pirates. Yeah, that's what they're trying to market it as.
Yeah, and I'm like, that doesn't work. It's not nearly as like interesting as what it was originally. Mm-hmm. But I can see this as a movie that people would flock to see, and they did. So,
but also there's some neat stuff on how they had to do this film to kind of just make it work and stitch it together, like the reverse photography they had to do in order to get the fog moving in the right direction. Because of course, I mean, they say don't work with children and animals. I say don't work with fog because the wind will blow it in which way it's going to go. Right. And so if the fog needs to be chasing them down the street, like it's easier to do that, when you're in a studio. But if you're trying to shoot on location in a town or on a cliff or on the seaside, you've got to have the fog going the way you want. And so they ended up being like, okay, it can be this direction or it can be the opposite direction. And if it's the opposite direction, then we're going to shoot everything backwards, including Adrienne Barbeau climbing to the top of the roof. They did it in such a way, or climbing back down and looking down, that the fog should be dissipating or going away from her. And so they shot that backwards. And then if there's of course, one where the truck is backing up and then driving away, in a scene that I feel like would be difficult to choreograph backwards. But they made it work. So yeah, great job. Technically, I never second guessed the fog really in this movie.
No, and I didn't know that was the case until we watched that little intro, right?
This movie has to get one thing right, which is the believable fog, and it really did.
What's the goddamn title? So it has to be believable. And that's fairly ingenious. You know what I mean? I wonder how many takes they did before John Carpenter or someone, hopefully in his little onset think tank, was like, just make the truck drive backward.
Yep.
And he was like, okay,
Yep. Which is a good natural segue into the look and feel of this movie, right? And so this film was shot by cinematographer Dean Cundey, which we mentioned before, but we didn't mention who Dean Cundey is. So he was nominated for an Academy Award once for Best Cinematography for his work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
That's quite a difference.
Yeah, but he also did little movies like Escape from New York and The Thing and Halloween 1 and 2 and 3. 2 and 3. And also non-Carpenter movies like Romancing the Stone or Back to the Future 2 and 3 and Jurassic Park.
Ooh.
And that was his only Academy Award nom.
He didn't get nominated for Jurassic Park?
Nope, not Jurassic Pork.
Well, then, again, John Carpenter likes to surround himself with people that he's worked with before, obviously. And having made some of these movies, well, I guess Escape from New York and The Thing came after The Fog.
Yeah.
But, surround yourself by talent and talent that you like to work with, and, you will always have a decent film.
Well, especially like his work on The Thing. And I didn't know that the same guy did Jurassic Park. We might have mentioned it in Jurassic Park. We might have mentioned it in The Thing, but we forget these details as we go through time.
No, we've covered so many movies.
Yeah, and deep dive into these. But I know that we already mentioned Val Lewton produced horror films like I Walked with a Zombie, Isle of the Dead, all suggestive, shadowy, kind of silhouette-y kind of stuff. But he also mentioned Lovecraft as an influence in the proposed look of the ghosts, wanting them to seem unknowable, right? And wanting them to remain silhouettes to spark moviegoers' own imagination, which could be worse than showing any kind of makeup effect. I'm thinking of 1979's Alien, where they show as little of it as possible, and so he kind of did that, when he was shooting this in 1979, I think as well, to make them hinted at as much as possible. In fact, I think in the original cut, he didn't really show much of them at all, right? It wasn't until the reshoots where he actually showed them with weapons, close enough with weapons. They were always shadows knocking at the door and other things. And at the end, I feel like this rescan made them more into silhouettes, because I remember the first time I watched this, they were too brightly lit. And I could tell they were wearing goggles with eyes or something on, or maybe my TV was lit too bright or something, but it looked bad. And this time it looked much, much better. And so it's still very hinted at. And he wanted that Cthulhian, if you saw this thing's face, you would know madness, right? And so they never do. They never show us the faces, which is great.
I think the closest that we get is a close-up shot of a cheek with maggots on it.
Hinting at the necrotic leprosy or whatever,
And that's the thing, is that they go out of the way to really make the audience aware that these are lepers or were lepers, right? And there's a whole post-colonial thing that we could talk about how people were treated, for that particular disease. That I don't think it's talked about that much anymore, but they talk about it a lot, and you don't get to see it. So you get to imagine exactly what they must look like, not just as ghosts, but as kind of zombie type figures, and the characters in this movie are very, very scared of them. And I think that we are by proxy.
Yeah.
And the thing is that when he's talking about shadows and things that are unknowable, Val Lewton is the perfect example of something from horror history to talk about with that, because all of his movies are about being scared of shadows. And the most we ever get to see is the reaction of the characters in those movies, right? So if you look at a Val Lewton movie like Cat People, which has one of the scariest sequences in it ever, all we ever see is a shadow of a cat. and the reaction of the character, but it's still incredibly frightening. And I think that Carpenter does that really, really well in The Fog. Like I don't need to see everything, No. Sometimes just a silhouette is good.
Yeah, we are constantly complaining about explaining too much of the mythology or things like that, and showing is telling, right? And if you show us too much, also, it ruins the scare.
Sometimes, though, you have to show and explain. So if you're going to have 6 months die, let's show it for a little bit longer on the board. And if you're going to have someone draw a 3 in the tile, maybe
Well, that's the whole point of all of this, right? If you shine the light of day on something, it's less scary.
That's right. I guess it also has to be a mystery.
Yeah.
So.
It has to be in a fog. So although this was a lower budget independent film, Carpenter chose to shoot the film in anamorphic 2.35:1 format to elevate its visual appearance. I don't know what anamorphic itself has to do. To me, anamorphic is more of a format that you shoot it all square and then they lengthen it out into the traditional, very much widescreen. And I guess anamorphic is always that 2.35:1, but it was a way that you could kind of see full frame, you shoot in full frame, but still get the widescreen.
It does feel like a very wide, expansive kind of movie.
It is. So that 2.35:1 is not super like spaghetti Western epic, from the 50s or something. I think like Ben-Hur is one of like the most skinniest letterboxed movies you will ever see. And it's like almost 3-1 or something like crazy like that. I think the most at the end is They Come at Night. Where every nightmare, it shows much more angled, like you're looking through a slit. And by the end of the movie, the film itself becomes the nightmare. And the aspect ratio gets really, really skinny and claustrophobic. Well, usually it's not meant to do that. It's meant to make things look more expansive and epic looking, right? Or film with a capital F, right? And so you see people start to do this. They used to not care as much what they filmed on as long as they get the film. But these kind of avant-garde filmmakers are coming along like Ridley Scott and John Carpenter and Steven Spielberg, who are shooting like Jaws and Alien and The Fog on expensive film stock for the first time. Right. And they're doing this widescreen stuff that makes their films look really good. So like people still say today, Alien is a B movie shot in a film kind of way. Right. And that's it right there. It's like, just because we're making this doesn't mean it can't look beautiful. Right. And that's a very new attitude starting in the late 70s, I'd say, with mainstream horror. And I love it. And it makes this film kind of timeless. It doesn't look like it was shot yesterday, like the new rescan of in digital noise reduction for Aliens does, but it's pretty close.
Well, when you use something like aspect ratio to elevate your film, you know what I mean? Like it adds a little something to it for sure. And I feel like The Fog itself has a lot of like scenery that it shows, and you have to be able to show like wide expanses of sea to get like just the sheer aspect of all the fog coming in. So it fits, And here I thought that Animorphs was just a series of books about people turning into animals.
Anamorphic. No, I don't know. I have my favorite aspect ratio, which is essentially 16:9, which is full frame. Like, right, when you buy a TV now, everything's widescreen.
Yeah.
If I am watching something and it's still like skinny on my gigantic projector screen that I have now, I really want to see things full frame. And so I like 16:9. That's why I like Aliens so much. He wanted to do things, he called it full screen. It's still widescreen, technically 16:9, right? But if it fills the full screen, like it takes advantage of the entire thing. Like, I feel like there's other ways, that you can show epicness or give a feeling other than aspect ratio. But my ultimate thing is if I ever make a movie, I want to play with aspect ratio. There's no reason not to, especially if you're shooting digitally, and change the aspect ratio subtly for different scenes, Well,
I love it when movies do that. When you do that, especially if you haven't noticed, but all of a sudden something happens and you're like, okay.
Well, It Comes at Night is a perfect example of that.
Yes. And it's probably one of the better things about that movie.
The only good thing about that movie.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the thing is though, like sometimes you're watching some of these things and you're like, have I been squinting? Like my eyes should hurt. You're like, oh, it's not my face doing the squinting. The director has done it for me.
Well, Everything Everywhere All at Once happens when it gets more cinematic. The bars slowly come down. Sometimes you notice, sometimes you don't. Now, one thing I hate though is when they switch, because like Nolan does this a lot. He does Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
He does a lot of filming in IMAX,
Mm-hmm.
but then he just mixes with his 35 millimeter or whatever, right? So he's like mixing 70 millimeter with like IMAX with like, 35 millimeter. And then it's like one scene. And then like sometimes in the same scene, it'll intercut like The Dark Knight Returns or whatever the fuck it was, right? With the Joker. There's a scene where the truck is flipping. And when the truck's flipping, it's IMAX. And then like the very next scene of the aftermath of the truck flipping is back down to 35 millimeter. I'm like, why are you doing this in the same scene? Or sequences that will just be full frame and then they'll go back to that filmic. And I'm like, let's do a little bit better of a transition. Let's plan it a little bit better.
It can be jarring. The thing is that Carpenter nothing is jarring in this movie and it doesn't really change, but like.
We really got off track. I apologize.
But that's okay. I mean, this is a film podcast. So we're talking about like film. And I feel like Carpenter really got to stretch some of his directorial legs doing this, right? It was the first time he had a real amount of money to do things like buy expensive film and play around with stuff like that.
He also kind of did that for Halloween, though. Like, these people are making like stuff, fucking George Lucas in 1977. Star Wars was done. Like, they were really, really trying to be good with the film stock, like this new post Francis Ford Coppola world. Mm-hmm. I think where film stock and cinematography were really doubled down on with that crew of filmmakers coming out of that, which was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and John Carpenter
and De Palma,
De Palma, James Cameron, everyone coming out in the late 70s and 80s were all kind of obsessed with the better film stocks and aspect ratios.
I think we're better for it. So
anyway, it looks very different from other horror films of the 70s and 80s that were kind of more exploitation looking, and grainy.
I think it also
Grindhouse. This does not look like a Grindhouse film.
It is not a typical 1980s horror movie, right? And I think everything about it just goes along with that. Although we would be remiss if we're talking about a John Carpenter movie and not talk about its music.
Right. And to me, this is one of John Carpenter's best, if not the best work he's ever done. I like it better than Halloween.
It is his best.
Thank you.
In my opinion. I feel like the themes and the fog are fucking iconic.
Yes.
The thing is that everyone goes to Halloween first, but like anytime
Halloween
I
is
hear
his most simple and effective.
Yes.
But this is like everything he learned from Halloween and then like upped his game, because not only does it have that synthesizer score and it even utilizes some of that same beat in the background that he uses. It's like a percussive way to use the synthesizer.
Right.
It's not exactly a beat or bass. And then he also uses piano themes that really, really work well. And then also there's church organ, right? That kind of bridges the gap between old and new horror. And I fucking love that about this. And Halloween just doesn't have that. This one does. And no other John Carpenter score really does what this one does, right? Because it's trying to tell like a classic ghost story. And so it does include that heavy synthesizer, but it has that church organ and those piano themes. And it really seems to bridge the past to the modern, functioning as kind of like a missing link between like Universal Hammer films of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then the 80s horror scene, which this film was part of kicking off, right? It was filmed in 1979, came out in 1980.
This really was. I mean, because like a lot of the money that this movie made was from video rentals too, right? So we have to add on to its gross. And I feel like this is one of those movies from the 80s that people just sort of like grabbed onto when video rental stores were kind of a new thing. And it really started a whole bunch of like 80s horror movies. But it's also, this movie itself functions as kind of a missing link between those two things. Because right after this, and as we get into December, we're going to be talking about some Grindhouse movies. And like this was kind of a last hurrah of a 70s sensibility leading into the 80s, right? But it also, like any Carpenter movie, is going to pay some homage into the filmmaking and the themes and the acting and just everything about it, including the music. This is the best Carpenter score.
If you listen to this in isolation or even watch the movie, like it starts off with like a lightning crash, and then a church organ, which is very kind of Vincent Price. And then it goes directly into the synthesizer incredibly smoothly. And I was like listening to it in isolation, as I always try and do when I'm writing the notes for any film that we deep dive. And I was just kind of taken aback because I enjoyed it during the movie, right? And, but like I didn't and I knew I'd enjoy listening to it in isolation. I was looking forward to it, but I didn't realize I was going to like really think about it as this is the best of the best. This is cream of the crop John Carpenter score. And it just has historicity kind of bridging the gap, missing link between, everything that had come before it, and then segueing very strongly into like that 80s slasher sound in a way. And also just great music, honestly. And so I'm kind of in love with it. So yeah, if you're going to listen to any John Carpenter score, this is the one.
I think this is the one to listen to in its entirety.
Yeah.
Too, right? Like, way back when we did our top 10
and a lot of
scores,
them are long tracks. Like,
yeah. When we did our top 10 horror scores, I had Halloween 3 in my top 10, right? And John Carpenter wrote some pieces for that.
Yeah.
And those are really good. And I really, really like them. And they're good individually. But as a whole, like this one is excellent.
Yeah.
So, and I don't listen to a whole lot of scores in their entirety, but this is just one that I do. So,
agreed. Well, now that we've talked about the production, maybe we should talk about the themes a little bit.
They are aplenty.
I mean, they are, but I mean, it's like the sins of the father, lies my father told me, a town's dark past. Mm-hmm. We've seen that before. Halloween, for instance, right? Nightmare on Elm Street is one. Certainly the town's dark past part of it. Friday the 13th, in a way, with the camp.
Yep.
Right? Pumpkinhead, certainly. Darkness Falls even later on, right?
Yes, much later, yeah.
Lots of other movies. Those are just the top of my head, right? And so this isn't trying to do anything new there. There's stuff before it, there's stuff after it, and there always will be, right?
Well, that's a classic theme in film and in literature. Like there's always like uncovering of the past and things like that, and trying to make amends or not, or even just like having these sins like come to the light of day. And I think that Father Malone in this movie, Hal Holbrook, is really at the forefront of this. Like he's the one who recognizes it. He's the one who feels remorse for it. He's the one who tries to remedy it when all the characters don't really do that. Right. So this particular theme sort of just revolves around him, I think, entirely.
At the same time, to me, that weakens it because I've never been a fan of someone like placing the mantle of, previous generations' crimes on yourself, or on the other side, victimhood.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. I mean,
it doesn't make sense to me. Like it just doesn't compute. I have nothing to do with, anything that my father, let alone my great grandfather did, has zero connection to me.
I think that it would have been a more effective theme if we got to know the character of Father Malone a lot better in this movie. We don't, all we get to see of him really is him drinking a lot. We don't know why he's drinking a lot.
Yeah, he's a little muppety, right? So like, I wish that it kind of showed that more, and then I'd kind of understand his stance, which is like, it's all my fault, my father, and this church, So yeah, the town is literally built with the money taken from the corpses of these lepers,
But I mean, it wouldn't have taken much for them to do a little backstory or something to say why he was so like immediately guilty. Maybe he's guilty of something else, and so he's trying to right his own wrong. But we don't know. All we know is that most people would be like, "Sit down, Father, you're drunk."
Well, we know he's creepy because of that jump scare.
Well, he was just drinking in the shadows.
Drinking in the shadows. No. A memoir. William Fisher of Collider described the film as one preoccupied with a, quote, an all-American town getting ready to celebrate its founding, a founding marred by a dark crime. When Father Patrick Malone discovers the horrible truth and brings it to the attention of Mayor Kathy Williams, she shrugs it off and dismisses any impact or introspection it might cast over the centenary. It was so long ago, she reasons, and what is there to do about it? And she has a point. There's no changing the past, and at a certain distance, there's no rectifying it. I kind of agree with William Fisher.
I mean, I do to a point. First of all, though, William Fisher, Kathy Williams is not the mayor in this film. Okay. She clearly talks about the mayor, so she's not it. So if you're going to do something, sir, get it right. But she does. I mean, like, she's the person who goes to Father Malone and she's just like, pull yourself together, man. We have a celebration, and leaves him to his devices. But in 1976, America celebrated its centennial, right? Or bicentennial. And that wasn't 4 years after that when this movie came out. So I think that was still kind of fresh. And the thing is that people's ideas of America were kind of changing around that time anyway. And this movie focuses not only on the sins of the father and the sins of the past as far as like a community or a town is concerned, but maybe also the changing of the guard when it comes to American peoples.
Well,
and
it's like, come on, the whole fucking country is an Indian burial ground.
Well, yeah, because we stole it. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody, by the way.
Happy Thanksgiving! Writer Peter Hutchins notes that while the film contains these implicit themes, that Carpenter is, quote, more interested in conjuring up a sinister atmosphere than he is exploring some of the social ramifications of such a story, end quote. Yeah, he just wants to tell a goddamn ghost story, y'all.
And there's nothing wrong
These
with
themes
that.
are incidental. Like, I'm sorry, but John Carpenter was not trying to deep think about this stuff. He was trying to tell a ghost story, and he did, and it was successful.
And I think that's why people can read horror like stories and watch horror movies after the fact and pull these themes out. Like mostly people just want to say something.
The theme is there, but he took advantage of it more, and it's more incidental and to take advantage to create a ghost story rather than having something to say,
right?
Or have a moral stance on it, right? Because at the end of the day, you have your survivors.
It's a plot device.
Yeah, he's just trying to tell a goddamn ghost story, y'all. Let him service you.
As we wrap up our conversations about the themes of the fog, but still, I like to be pedantic, so it's okay.
Yeah, it has themes because it's a story, right? Any story has themes.
That's right. But you're right. I mean, he just wanted to make a horror story, a ghost story. He does it super effectively and is able to do things both new and old. You know what I mean? So whether or not you want to get too deep into like these things, but anytime I read something about the fog, they always talk about like the sins of the past.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just the plot device in this movie. But we do have some questions to ask about the fog. First off, and probably most silly, is the fog a horror movie?
Don't waste my time.
I mean, ultimately, yes, it has all the trappings of a horror movie. There are ghosts and murder and a fog. Were you scared while watching the fog?
The first time I watched it, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And it creeps me out. Certainly, like the earlier in the film is the more effective, right? It's not even a bell curve. It just like starts off pretty hardcore. And then it gets kind of less scary the more it goes. To me, the more we see of the pirates, like pirates aren't scary to me. They're goofy.
Yeah.
And so it's like the more silhouette-y and shadowy they are, the better. I don't know. And seeing the fog, the fog itself, is really, really cool.
Well, and that's what a ghost should be. A ghost should be a silhouette.
I love like seeing the silhouette and the ship through the fog when they're on the
trawler.
The trawler?
I forgot what the name of that boat was, like the Salty Lady or some shit like that.
I can't believe you didn't give me like a bunch of boat jargon to read in the
I
synopsis.
really fucking tried, I went so far as to look up the synopsis for Jaws to see if I could like put transom in there somewhere, but I just couldn't. So I was just like, I am going to throw him a bone and not put all that shit in.
Well, thank God.
I was also kind of scared when I watched The Fog for the first time as a kid. I watched all of my John Carpenter movies out of order, right? So the first one I ever watched was They Live, then I watched The Fog, then I watched Halloween.
Yeah.
And they're all individually scary in their own ways, but I was pretty scared watching The Fog because I was like 8.
Yeah.
But
I was much older when I saw The Fog the first time.
Like what?
Like probably early 20s.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, and like I said earlier, I've consistently watched The Fog throughout my life. Way more than I've seen The Fog way more than I've seen Halloween.
I didn't really see much of any John Carpenter. I think that maybe the first John Carpenter I saw was probably Vampires.
It was a good one.
No.
It is a good one. They're all good.
Maybe I'll have to revisit it because I just hate James Woods. So
yeah, I'm not a fan. I really like John Carpenter movies. I think they're really good. I think that he's an effective horror director. I think he's scary. And I think that he can play with genre in horror and make it interesting. I think when he makes a movie that he's not considered to be a horror movie, like Escape from New York, it's still a horror movie. Right? Yeah. He's a horror director. And I think that's pretty impressive. What did you rate The Fog?
At first I rated a 3.5. Based on some interesting inconsistencies, like narratively and visually, maybe from the reshoots, I think.
Maybe.
Like one thing that annoys me as Adrienne Barbeau is like shouting from the rooftop, so to speak, where she's having to go down 600 steps or whatever to this lighthouse, even though she can see all the town, even though it's like, you can tell that it's only facing the coast. Meanwhile, she's looking out at this town. She's looking out at the town, talking to the town about where the fog is going. But the view that we get from her perspective is literally just to the beach. Yep. And I'm just like, what are you doing? And so I'm wondering if that's part of the tension ramping is her kind of narrating almost Orson Welles-ian, through the fog emergency or whatever, and telling them what to do. And it's like they just did not have the establishing shots of that town ever, not even once.
They did not, but instead we see Adrienne Barbeau, like it's certainly rolling down Avenue C.
Yeah, certainly not in his relationship to the beach. No, it was all just done out, and so you have to make a decision, I guess she sees it and we don't, but we keep giving these reverse shots, and we're seeing the fog go match the coastline, but we don't see any fucking town, she's like, it's on Avenue C. It's at the third house on the left. What the fuck? She's not even having binoculars or whatever the fuck.
It's at the corner of Leper Avenue and Pirate Way.
Yeah.
You have to suspend your disbelief a little bit and just go with it. But I really feel like he probably did us a service with these reshoots and making it a more tense movie, which is one of the reasons why I consistently rate The Fog 4 stars, right? So when I went to Letterboxd to rate this movie, I couldn't remember the last time I watched it. I knew it had been within a 5-year span. And it's within the last couple of years when I got onto Letterboxd because I'd already rated it. This is how often I watch The Fog. And every time I watch it, I feel like it's very tense, even though I know what's going to happen. I consistently like the characters, even though there are a lot of them.
And it moves fast. It's a good pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I created my nerdy spreadsheet calculator to help me rate and review movies. It's called Scans. So that whenever you rate something, you can go, that scans. Anyway, so yeah, it came up closer to a 4, right? Like a 3.8, 3.9 for both of us.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, that scans.
That scans. It's a 4-star movie. So, John Carpenter certainly has a way of telling stories and a way of filming them. He sometimes has economy with that, and sometimes he sort of lets it go. And he has kind of both in The Fog. And I really appreciate that. Finally, who is the hottest guy in The Fog?
Oh my God, I completely forgot about this question.
Oh, you're not prepared.
How could I? Stevie Wayne.
Adrienne Barbeau's the hottest guy. She's a mannish woman, but I
don't know.
Tom Atkins for me, I think that Tom Atkins is a handsome man. I think that in movies like Halloween 3, he's kind of dreamy.
Yeah. At first I was like, what are you doing in a movie? And then he kind of grew on me.
Mm-hmm.
Like a leprosy boil.
He grows on you like a skin tag. There's really not a whole lot of other options in this, honestly. Hal Holbrook is not
Father Malone.
He's not an unattractive man, Neither is Charles Cyphers, but Tom Atkins, I guess, for the win.
Atkins.
Amber Atkins. Do you have some fun facts for me?
I kind of do.
It's your lead every time we record now.
Maybe. You be the judge. It's subjective. Jazz music was used for Stevie Wayne's radio station because the royalties were more affordable than royalties for rock music.
They paid royalties for the shit she was playing in this movie?
Well, you have to, right?
They couldn't find something. She'd be like, okay, now here's Camptown Races.
Yeah. I don't know. I think her voice is more for a jazz station, right? For a rock station.
There should have been talk radio because that's what it turned out to be at the end of the day.
Now let me slip into something more comfortable. Here, it's the Marilyn Manson. I don't know.
You ready to dig through the ditches?
Burn through the witches? That fog is moving as fast as Dracula. All right, the lead ghost, Blake, was played by special effects artist Rob Bottin. When Bottin asked for the job, John Carpenter asked him to stand up. Bottin expected Carpenter to say and get out. When Carpenter saw that Bottin was a very large man at 6'5", which was needed for the character of Blake, he was hired.
He's 6'5"?
To both play Blake and to do the effects, I guess.
Ooh.
The invisible creature effects. You were in charge of silhouettes. Easiest job ever. Although this movie cost just over $1 million to make, Avco Embassy spent 3 times that amount on advertising and promotion. This included TV ads, radio ads, print ads, and the studio even installed fog machines at a cost of $350 each in the lobbies of selected cinemas where the movie was showing. Why don't they do this anymore?
Movie should be an event.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that we got to go see movies in the 80s, so we got to experience some of these things, but I don't remember a fog machine ever being used anywhere I went.
Nope.
Bring that shit back, y'all.
Next up, the role of Father Malone was originally offered to Sir Christopher Lee,
Whoa.
who believed the character to be the father of the community. However, Lee proved unavailable and Hal Holbrook was eventually cast. I would have loved that. I would have had a seizure, like I said earlier. If just one more horror icon was added to this, I would just start convulsing.
I mean, talk about the missing link, though. If you're gonna talk about like bridging the horror gap between a 60s and 70s horror sensibility leading into the 80s, you have to have Christopher Lee for that.
And then have him play the church organ, like inside that church.
I mean, come on. Playing the church organ because he's so upset about the sins of his grandfather.
Yeah, and Vincent Price was still alive, right? Because he was in Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, but Vincent Price would have been way too campy for this. You know, like Christopher Lee really needs that like somber, I'm really sad kind of thing. Like, hand me that gold cross. I'm going to fix this.
Bring the hobbits unspoiled. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Lastly, when Father Malone first, I love Father Malone. That
The curmudgeon-y sad man.
When Father Malone first discovers the journal, he glances at the title page, then flips an open page of text which is partially blocked and seen only for a split second. If you pause the screen just at the right moment, the visible portion reads, with spelling errors, "Got my college education, only to work writing dumb shit in this fucking movie prop. It's time to bring in nude girls and big tits, tattoos, and shaved beavers." Now that's a fun fact. And it's written in that cursive-y, like, yeah.
I have a PhD in penmanship. You're right. That is a fun fact.
Yours in Christ, Rob Bottin.
Mic drop. I think that just about wraps up our conversation on The Fog. As always, we would like to know what you think about this movie and our conversation about it. You can find us on social media at The Film Flamers on X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, all the things.
You can email us at tiredqueens@filmflamers.com or call our hotline at
972-666-7733.
It's time to bring in the nude girls with big tits, tattoos, and shaved beavers. Call our hotline and enjoy.
Make your fog roll in.
And of course, I mean our tits and beavers.
That's right. Mine are already exposed. We have more content coming out for you on the Mean feed this November. We talked about Fog. So obviously, we're going to talk about Mist.
Chicken or the egg? Which came first?
Fog?
Does the mist arrive? I don't know.
Either way, guys, we have been champing at the bit to talk about the Mist lo these many years, and the time has finally come. And what better time to talk about one of horror canon's most depressing films than An Election November?
Oh my God, yeah. What a microcosm of society that film is.
Mm-hmm. One can only find a microcosm of that caliber if you would squat down and shit one out. Stay tuned for that, y'all. Also, head over to patreon.com/thefilmflamers where you will find this month's bonus episode, TBD.
That's right. We're going to be covering TBD.
That's right. And by that, probably a poll. So head over there, vote in it if it's available, and make your voice heard, and we will cover that movie here and read your name on Shooting the Flames.
Maybe a Frank Darabont, John Carpenter B-roll poll over there.
I just got a huge boner. Let's do that, please.
Or do you have a huge beaver?
Depending on my mood. Verse. So, Chris, speaking of beavers, I think it's time for us to go off and have some
sweet dreams. Is that what beavers do?
I think so. I don't know. Let's say it again.
Shaved dreams.
Sweet dreams. I couldn't think of a segue, really. I was trying to think of something about leprosy, and then I thought that could be offensive.
Oh,
Do people get leprosy anymore?
I don't think so.